as I said, she's going to be talking about DevOps practices in software quality.
Hello, Simon.
You can go next.
Yeah, we'll give you a rest if you want to go grab a tea and coffee, Simon.
Yeah, over to you, Beth. Enjoy yourselves, everyone.
Thank you, Nicola. Okay, so I won't reintroduce myself again too much because you've heard my introduction twice already this morning. But in addition to being on SIGiST committee, I am a quality and DevOps specialist at Rosen. So my career background up to date has mainly been as a test engineer and a test lead. But recently I've changed roles. I've shifted slightly with a focus more on the DevOps side of software development. So you might be thinking, why am I stood here today as a DevOps specialist coming to talk to a bunch of testers and quality assurance people about testing and quality when that's not what I do anymore? But what I've actually found in my role working in DevOps is that DevOps and quality tend to go hand in hand. They're almost interchangeable in terms of the impact that they deliver to software development processes. So what I want to talk about today is what I've learned as a DevOps specialist that I think you as testers and quality specialists can learn, and some actions that you might be able to take away to implement in your software development practices to help further improve the quality of your software products. So what I hope to cover in the next 20 to 30 minutes. So I'll start off with a bit of an intro to what is DevOps. So for some of you that might have done that before, this might not be new to you, but I want to make sure we've got everything covered. I'll then move into the connection between DevOps and quality, why I think that is, what that looks like. And then finally, just a few actions that you can take away if you think, actually, I really enjoyed that talk. I want to start implementing those practices in my workplace. Just a couple of small actions that you can take away and do. So the detail, what actually is DevOps? So the word DevOps is a combination of development and operations. So it generally tends to combine all code development, software development activities that you might understand in a traditional sense, along with the operations side. Some teams in some companies do have dedicated operations teams. They might be on-call engineers that come out when your servers go down in the middle of the night. They might be teams that work the 9-to-5 schedule and perhaps assist with things like infrastructure, making sure you have the right hardware available, computing resources, things like that. But the aim of DevOps is, rather than having two separate teams that manage these processes independently, bringing them together under one roof so you have a DevOps specialist. So we're not quite software developers, whilst I do some programming. I also don't fully do operations. I'm not on call. I'm not responsible for all elements of hardware. I'm mainly just there to help support the team in being able to deliver the work that they need to do in an efficient way, in a faster way, but also while maintaining the quality and the certifications that we need to do. So with my job at Rosen, we make technology for the oil and gas pipeline inspection sector, so a really highly regulated sector. And so DevOps might seem like something, because it's iterative and agile, that doesn't fit with that kind of industry, but it really does. And I'll explain why a bit more later on. Getting ahead of myself this morning. So there are a few different ways that you can define what DevOps is, and depending on where you look on the internet, you'll probably get about 20 different definitions of what the role of a DevOps person is, because it's just a relatively new role to the software sector. So I tried to break it down into a few general concepts of what that role involves. The first one is infrastructure. So this might include things like setting up continuous integration and deployment pipelines. It might include automating your checks. So if anyone here is familiar with tools like Azure or Jenkins or GitLab, for example, where you might run your unit test suite or your system test suite or some linting checks, that all comes under the umbrella of DevOps. It's all about what tools are available to help make that process and that ecosystem more suitable to your developers. It's also about looking out for what else is out there. One of the values of DevOps, which I'll speak more on in the next slide, is about continuous improvement. It's always about accepting that where you currently are is not the best you're ever going to be. The tech industry, as I'm sure we're all aware, is changing day by day with new tools, new ideas coming out. It feels like every hour sometimes. And so the role of a DevOps specialist is to look out for what is available, what could actually help take our team to that next level. And in terms of quality assurance, it's also about making sure, are we still adherent to certifications? Has anything changed recently in our market or our landscape? What's our customer feedback? Are there new requirements or features that we need to be building in? And then working that into the development process. Second side is less technical. It's more about people, which is why I really like my job, because it's a role in tech where I spend about half my time programming, looking at all this tooling, and the other side working really closely with the people in my team to understand their thoughts, their skills, what they're worried about, what they're happy with, and because ultimately DevOps is all about customizing development processes to what suits the team to enable you to produce the best output. So the people side of things has, again, a few different elements to it. The first one is education. You do not want to implement all this new infrastructure, all these wonderful pipelines, invest in all of these subscriptions and licenses, but then your team have no idea how to use them or how to use them properly or why you're using them. So education is a really large part of what we do. Change management is also a huge side, and it varies on company to company how much change management you've got to do. If you're in a company that's been using DevOps philosophies for a while, there might not be too much to do. People might be familiar with the terms that you want to use, familiar with their tool chain. If, for example, in my job, when I joined Rosen, DevOps was a relatively new thing. There's a lot of fear that comes with change, and there's a lot of change management in terms of explaining what it is you're going to do, why you're going to do it, and bringing people on that journey with you. And finally, there's processes. So again, if you have all of these tools, but you don't have a set of processes on how to use them, quality goes out the window, because people can use those tools however they want to use it. They might customize it for whatever feels right for them, rather than what's actually right for that project or that environment that they're working in. And the final side to DevOps is reporting. So this is probably where DevOps comes into its own as potentially a different field to development and operations. It's all about looking at metrics, it's looking at delivery speed, it's looking at numbers of bugs. Again, similarities with the quality assurance world, but reporting is really where DevOps kind of adds its extra value. So as I mentioned before, DevOps has a set of values, and this is because really DevOps is sort of a philosophy, it's an idea, it's not a task, it's not an action. And so with a philosophy or an idea comes a set of values. Again, depending where you look on the internet, you'll get a range of between 3 and 5 DevOps values that might differ slightly in wording, but I've tried to summarize them down into 4 that I think kind of encompass everything I find. The first DevOps value is all about collaboration. So it's all about being open and transparent and removing information silos. You do not want to have one expert that has all of their knowledge in their head, not have it documented down. You want to be sharing that knowledge amongst your teams. But you also want to be doing that in a psychologically safe space. And this is a problem that you do come in with when you've got long-term projects where you've had experts that have maybe been working on a piece of software for 10 or 20 years, and they think, I'm the only one that knows how this works. I'm the only one who knows how to test this properly. I'm the only one who understands. And so anyone that's new to the project doesn't want to question them. They're like, yeah, they're probably right. They've been doing this for 20 years. What can I add? And so part of DevOps is actually removing those thoughts and those barriers and saying, well, actually, everyone has the opportunity to learn. And even the people that have been on the project for 20, 30 years perhaps still have things to learn. The second value is all about automation. So this is referring back to the technical side of things. We want to remove any overhead tasks from a team that don't add value by being done by a person. So if you've got things like automating your regression tests, for example, looking at your linting checks, that's something that people hate doing. I've not found anybody who loves running flake-8 on their Python code. So if you can automate all of that and just remove a little piece of work from your development team, that actually enables them to focus on value-adding tasks. With testers, for example, that might be removing them from running regression tests and actually enabling them to have time to do exploratory testing. Or if you're working on a really complex new technology like AI or machine learning, enabling them to work out, how am I actually going to test that? And over time, it will save you time because the tools will be running lots of these manual tasks for you, but it'll also help your team just become genuinely happier in their job. And I think when you've got a team that's performing well, that's happy and is enjoying their work, quality inherently increases because you've got people that care about the job that they want to do. Continuous improvement, something I've already touched on, is that tech is moving at a fast pace and there are always new things coming out. So with DevOps, we accept that where we are now is not the best that we're ever going to be. We always look to improve. And finally, user focus. So some people might ask, well, why do DevOps in the first place? The processes I've got in place, my methodology, they work completely fine for us. So why would I ever think about changing to DevOps? And user focus is probably the biggest reason, because ultimately by implementing DevOps processes and cultures, it makes your teams more flexible and efficient in responding to customer feedback, whether that's a new feature, whether that's a bug fix. It just allows you to maintain a really high delivery speed but without compromising on quality, because you've pulled on automation to check for regression, you've pulled on collaboration, so everyone's got the knowledge. So if your customer goes, right, I want this new feature in 2 weeks, but the person who's an expert on that feature is on holiday, if you don't have a DevOps approach and that one person has all the knowledge, what do? You either wait for 2 weeks and upset the client, or you bring people on who aren't experts and potentially sacrifice the quality of that project. But in a DevOps world where you've shared that knowledge, you've got documentation, that an expert has shared their knowledge in workshops, you can actually still continue to deliver in a fast rate without sacrificing quality. So that's my overview on DevOps. Now, I've touched a bit on how it relates to quality. I'm hoping it's fairly obvious from what I'm saying, but I want to dive down a bit more into the detail of how it connects to quality. So this is a rough diagram of a software development lifecycle. Obviously, if it's waterfall, you just go from left to right. And if it's an iterative cycle, you just repeat that. I obviously didn't put all of them on there. That would have taken up the whole slide. But how do we apply this abstract concept of DevOps to this very not abstract process of the software development lifecycle? Well, you might notice on this diagram, there is not a dot for DevOps. It is not a stage in the software development lifecycle. It doesn't add anything new to it. It's not a new task. It's not, a gateway that you pass through if you're working in waterfall. It's actually something that's embedded throughout the entire software development lifecycle. And DevOps processes can support every step and add value in terms of quality to every single step. For example, in the planning phase or the requirements gathering phase, whatever you might want to call it, DevOps processes can give you foresight. So this will help you to identify potential dependencies because you've got those automated suites that allow you to check, oh, actually, if I change this bit of code, what else is going to be affected? If there's a change in requirements that maybe potentially affects certification, you can automate those checks as well through DevOps. And you can always just keep an eye on traceability. In the development phase, it provides you with consistency, which sort of speaks for itself. By standardizing a bunch of processes and then enforcing those processes with automation, it means that you should end up in a place where your code base is written that you can't tell who in the development team wrote that code. It should be written in a standardized way that any new engineer coming along should be able to read it, get a good understanding, and pick up where someone else left off in a consistent way. And that really helps add value for quality, particularly in highly regulated sectors like safety critical sectors, where you need to make sure that everything is easily auditable if you end up in that sort of position. Testing, probably what most of you here are interested in today, is how it adds value in testing. And I think it gives you depth. By implementing DevOps processes, you take away, like I mentioned before, those repetitive tasks that do not add any value by being done by a person. There are so many DevOps tools and platforms out there that can automate a bunch of your test processes for you. And it frees up testers to actually focus on, where can I add value to this project? Where can I use my expertise? So if that is in AI or exploratory testing, you can do that. But what's also great is you can actually involve testers in your DevOps processes. And this is how I actually made the sidestep into DevOps. Was I was a tester. We were looking to set up new GitLab pipelines and we wanted to automate our test suite running. So they decided, you know what, let's get the testers involved. They're the experts. They're the ones who care about this. Let's involve them in that process. And whilst that also taught me a lot and got me into DevOps, it also meant that any other testers were able to sort of find a new way to test. It enabled them to prevent bugs entering the software rather than just identifying them afterwards. So it helps them get a bit more visibility on what else is going on. And finally, in the deployment or maintenance phase, DevOps can give you speed. And now, I know speed might seem like the enemy to quality. And in the case of rushing a deployment or a release, absolutely, that is not good for quality. Rushing is never good. But speed here also really means speed to respond to change. So this means agility, flexibility, again, looking at customer feedback, market changes, requirements changes, regulation changes, bug fixes. Having DevOps in place means that you're able to respond to that much more quickly. You can identify problems faster, identify any potential things that might delay your delivery, notify your customer faster. And so it can bring speed to that section. So we've talked about the benefits and what they are, and how do you actually implement that now in your software development lifecycle? Well, again, because I think DevOps and quality is so similar, I think you can implement quality in two main ways that mirror the applications of DevOps. The first in DevOps was the people side, but in quality that translates into culture. And this is the first thing that I think needs to change if you want your DevOps practices to impact quality. Mainly because it's a really hard task. It's really difficult to change culture. It's really difficult to identify what your culture is currently like in relation to where it needs to be, because it's not something tangible, it's not something measurable, it's very subjective, it changes with your teams. So a piece of advice I have if you're trying to look at where your culture is and where it might need to change is ask what motivates your team. Is it the senior management direction that they set? Is it money and their bonuses? Is it they actually really enjoy a challenge and they want, to be able to do that more complex work, like I mentioned before, freeing up testers for exploratory testing? Or do they just prefer ease? They want everything to be really simple, and so they're actually going to value the automation side of things more. And by finding out what motivates them, you can say, right, yes, that aligns with where we want to go. It's great that you value automation. Or you can say, actually, what senior management is currently putting down does not align with DevOps, but that's what motivates my team. So maybe I need to go talk to those other stakeholders and see what we can do and what I need to tell them in order to get everyone on the same page. Culture really does play a key role in implementing DevOps practices because, like I mentioned in my previous slide, it impacts the whole software development lifecycle. It's not just one task or one action to complete. Creating products that use a DevOps or quality first philosophy require a huge shift in mindset for your team. And like I said, that's not just the testers and developers, it's senior management, it's project management, it's customers who may have to deal with, actually, for a couple of weeks, things might be delayed whilst we implement these new processes, but in the longer term, it will be worth it for you because we'll be able to respond to your requests faster. Culture ultimately helps you to lay down the foundations of what you need for your team and then help you keep momentum. So let's think about this the other way around. Let's say you do culture last, you implement all the technology first, and then you're like, right, we've got all the stuff in, now let's teach people how to use it, let's show it why it's important. The problem there is you end up with all the gear and no idea. You end up with all of these wonderful tools, and then people might get really excited about it for 2 weeks. It's novel, it's new, they really want to try it out. And then a month later, they either don't like using it, they don't understand the point, they found something new and exciting that they want to go try instead. And you just end up back where you started, if not in a worse position. So you really do need to focus on tackling culture first and bringing people along on the journey. But what I want you to remember is that this task takes a lot of time. It is not going to happen overnight. And if you try and drag people into this new mindset that you want them to live in, you're going to end up with people not on your side. So you need to be prepared to take things slow. You need to, I guess from an agile term, iterate through. You want to start with the minimum changes that maybe act as like a proof of concept or prove the value before moving on to the larger changes that will come later. So the second side, once you've got the culture in place, let's pretend that that is all done magically within 10 minutes. And once that's in place, then and only then do you focus on the technical side of DevOps. You then start looking at what software can I buy, what hardware can I buy, who do I need to recruit to help put this infrastructure in place. And really, I think most importantly on the technical side, because I'm not going to go into detail on all the tools, there are plenty out there. Please Google them or come and chat to me afterwards. But one of the most important technical sides of DevOps is the metrics. And I think this is where the synergy and impact between DevOps and quality really comes into its own. So I think that metrics, they come out of all sorts of tools. They come out, they're quite natural. Tools like SonarQube, for instance, do static analysis on your code, can check for bugs, vulnerabilities, security hotspots, etc., code coverage. Various testing frameworks will also give you test statistics, or you might get performance statistics from your continuous integration pipelines. But actually, there's so many metrics out there. How do you know which ones are actually going to help your team and what to focus on? And so I want to provide 3 things that you can look for when you're looking for a metric. So the first one is making sure that it's up to date. So if you've got metrics that were produced a month ago, that might not be really helpful for telling you how your team is doing today. If you know that a month ago there were 7 bugs in your code, that does not tell you anything about how many there are today. There could be 0, 7, 100. And so it's making sure that you've got metrics that were collected recently. And with DevOps and continuous integration, you can get metrics that were produced a minute ago. You can run your test suite, you can check for updates. And so if a customer wants to know the live status of their product, or an engineer wants to know, hey, did we fix that bug? You can get instant feedback on that and collect those metrics. It's also really useful for reporting back to the team. I mentioned about that culture of collaboration. You want to be bringing everyone on this journey with you. So by having up-to-date metrics, you can paint an accurate picture of where you are. You can highlight problems to your teams and then get better and more useful feedback from them. The second factor for a metric is it has to be useful. And this is difficult to define. What one person thinks is useful, another might not. But again, that DevOps culture of collaboration, which I also think is really important for quality, means that once you've come up with a set of metrics, share it with your team, see what they think about it, ask the people that it's actually going to affect. Is this metric telling you anything useful, or is this just something that I want to collect? And finally, and this might be the most controversial of them all, is accepting that your metrics are going to change. So continuous improvement is all about accepting you're not going to be in the same position and your metrics are exactly the same. You might set some metrics one year that says, okay, this is our goal for the product and these are the metrics that align with that. And then in a year's time, your product's taking a different direction, you've got a different team, maybe you've got different focuses and goals. You have to accept that your metrics are going to change. Again, some people sitting there thinking, well, you know, I work in a really highly regulated industry, nothing ever changes, it's been the same for 20 years. As we see with more emerging technologies and markets coming out in the tech space, new regulations coming out all the time. And so even those kind of industries need to remember that metrics need to be changeable. And also changeability feeds into usability. So if you've got metrics that you haven't actually looked at in 2 years, you've just reported on them and accepted them as gospel, they might not be useful anymore. So you need to remember that your metrics will be flexible. So what can you actually do? So it might seem that there's quite a lot that you could do in order to implement DevOps practices. It's quite a big idea that could change everything that you currently do. And if you're not sure where to start, I just want to give you 4 action points that you can take away today if you wanted to get started on implementing DevOps in your software development to improve quality. So the first is all about future-proofing your practices. You will not be able to change everything overnight. You might leave this talk feeling really energized and I want to go implement all this cool stuff. It's not going to be in place by tomorrow. Like I mentioned before, the culture needs to happen first, and that is going to take months, if not years, to get in the right place. But you might be able to identify some small wins. Can you maybe get a proof of concept repository that uses continuous employment and integration practices and show that to your team as a demonstration of this might be where we can go? If you've got a code monolith that maybe you want to refactor and have in a new standardized way, maybe you want to write a coding guideline, you're not going to refactor that overnight, but what can you start with? Can you work on a couple of smaller functions? Could you maybe work on splitting out your monolith into many different files or components? The second is find your supporters. So this relates to that change management piece that I talked about. Is with any change, not everyone's going to agree with you. It's a miracle if everyone is on side when you want to suggest a change, no matter how good it might be for your team. So it's really important to find those people that are in your corner, who agrees that quality is first, who agrees that this is the right way to go, and make sure that you're in regular contact with them, you're getting feedback from them, you explain to them what you want to do. And so then when you bring this idea to the whole team, you've got some people who are in your corner, because DevOps and quality are team sports. It's a culture-based thing, so you need people on your side. You should never try and do it alone, because it's going to be much more difficult than you need it to be. Rethinking code reviews. So hands up if you've ever done a code review in your life. Keep your hand up if you love doing code reviews. Yeah, exactly. So code reviews is something that people who may not have even heard the word DevOps before today have an experience with. And I wrote a blog post on this, and I'll share a link to my blog at the end. But I think it's a thing that companies are not getting the most value from. It's an activity we're all forced to do. You have to review someone's code. But half the time you just some people might just look at it and give it a tick and they don't bother with it. Other people like to go down to the tiniest little details that they want you to fix. I see some nods in the room. So, you have people in your mind that do that. And it just becomes a pain for everybody. You understand it has to be done, but nobody enjoys doing it. And there's a lot you can learn from DevOps to improve your code review processes. So again, automating various things. Don't have people checking that the unit's test suite runs. Have a tool do it. Don't have them checking for stylistic checks. Have a tool do it. Actually give the reviewer something interesting to look at. Let them use their knowledge to find real problems that a tool can't spot. But also for code reviews, I think they're a really good opportunity to learn. We often fall into a routine where only the expert in that area of code does the review because they know what's best and they'll be able to find errors. And sure, that's great for quality. We absolutely want someone who knows what they're doing. But then we also need to share that knowledge around. So maybe bring on a second reviewer who has never seen that code base before, who could benefit from learning about it. Have them look at the code, see what they think. And also, if they don't understand the code, you've probably got an issue with your documentation or your readability. So it helps you, again, improve the quality going forward by bringing other people in. And lastly, is about investing in your people. So there's quite a lot to learn in this space. There's lots of new tools. There's lots of things about culture that I've mentioned. So make sure that you're investing in training, whether that's online training or workshops or meetings. When I joined, I set up a monthly meeting with my team where I feed in about DevOps processes, and we have an open knowledge sharing forum where everyone can just ask questions freely. I'll deliver a bit of workshop style training and everyone learns together. You may even set up a Teams channel or a Slack channel just to allow people to chat and share ideas, share articles, talk about things, and really encourage that collaboration. But you do need to invest in making sure that people have the right skills to take this forward. And finally, I just want to leave you with this quote from Aristotle: quality is not an act, it is a habit. And DevOps is a system that can help you maintain that habit in a sustainable way. Thank you very much. We have some time for questions. 5 minutes for questions. Like I said, my link to my blog and my link tree is up there if you did want to check out any of my other content. But are there any questions in the room? Yeah, Colin.
Can you talk about the negative feedback you've had from anybody in your organization about?
Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely. So yeah, DevOps does not come being met positively by everybody, that's for sure. So I think with my development team, I actively support, everyone was very positive. They kind of knew that we needed to change in order to be sustainable. Our code base has more than tripled in size in the last year, and we didn't really have any automated processes, and it was becoming a lot of work and a lot of slog for the team, and they weren't enjoying it. So anything that would take away that work was great for them. It was actually more with the sort of higher level senior management, because they have KPIs that they want to measure. And the things that my team was saying were useful were not aligning with the high level business things. So because it's that level removed, DevOps is very low level, it's very technical. It's about how many bugs are there, how many pull requests, how many commits. Management don't care about those statistics. They just want to know how often can we be delivering the product. And so there's a bit of mismatch there, misalignment in showing them how it relates. I also think that because DevOps is quite a new idea, depending where you work, management don't necessarily understand what it is. And so there's a lot of education that needs to come in. So I'm educating senior management on what it is I actually do, what it is I'm looking to change and why. And so we're slowly getting there. I think it's just a bit of a defense mechanism to change has been the biggest problem I've faced so far. Any other questions? Hi.
I'm wondering, how do you see the difference between large scale projects and smaller scale ones, and what will be the difference in DevOps approach when we are talking about team sizes rather than functional agile teams to say 20, 30, 40 developers and testers?
So I think the main difference in terms of size of teams is that if you've got a large team, you probably want a dedicated team of DevOps specialists where that is all they do. They just look after the hardware, they look after the tooling, they're available to ask questions. If you're in a small team, you may only have one DevOps specialist, as in the case with my team. So there's 15 people in my team and I'm the DevOps specialist, and that works quite well. If you're in a really small team of maybe 4 people, you might not have a DevOps specialist. You might just share that knowledge out among the team and sort of have everyone be responsible. But yeah, I think with larger teams, it's more about making sure you have the resources to help, because there will be more questions about these processes than you think there's going to be. There's going to be, because of the continuous improvement, a lot of change, and it's too much responsibility for one person to have in a large organization. So I think in a large organization, you're just going to have a large dedicated team, and you won't see that in agile teams. Hi.
Yeah, just a quick question regarding like regulated environments and existing processes and documentation. How have you found changing that process by putting DevOps into it, or if DevOps was not in?
So yeah, DevOps was not in the process when I joined. And so that was one of the first tasks I took on, was to add new documentation, new formal, versioned, approved process documentation on how to implement DevOps and continuous improvement into our development processes. And in my experience, it's actually very positive, again, because they hired me because they accepted that there was a gap and that needed to be filled. And so they wanted it to come in. And I would hope that if anyone is hired to work in DevOps, it's because they want you to do something. So I would hope it wouldn't be too difficult. Writing the process is interesting because you're writing to quite a large audience. You're writing to some technical people who are actually going to be using the tools, but then this is also going to be used for like external audit checks. It's going to be read by senior management, the project managers who need to understand the processes being followed. And I think that was the most difficult thing, is knowing where to pitch this process, because I want to make sure it's high level enough that people outside of the project understand the impact, but it's low level enough that developers can and testers can follow that process step by step and know what to do. So actually getting it, approved was fine. It struggled to write it